The elephant in the room. This idiom describes an obvious problem that everyone knows about but nobody mentions. For example,
I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun.
Listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. We got 51 days left until trial. And in this video, and I will be putting out another video today breaking down the denial of the motion to continue. And I'll be the first to admit I've been wrong a lot here lately. Man, have I been wrong. I hadn't been wrong on facts of the case and things that have taken place, but I sure have been wrong on the judge's rulings. Man, those I can't seem to get right. But you got to understand, when I go through these rulings and I go through these motions and I go through them in depth, and y'all know I do, when I make a prediction based on what should happen, what I truly believe should happen in the law. So, yeah, I'm getting them wrong. I don't believe I'm really getting them wrong based on what should have happened in the law, though. I believe I'm getting them wrong based on what is happening. And in this video, I think we've got to point out something that nobody wants to talk about, and that is the elephant in the room. Now, I put out a video yesterday going through the alternative perpetrator evidence that the judge denied for the defense, and I spent a lot of time going through that, looking at it, thinking about it, and deciphering it based on everything that we know. And I came to one conclusion, and that one conclusion was this has got to be a defense strategy, because there's no way, based on what I read, that the defense would go into that, presenting that evidence based on everything I know about their investigation into this case. And I'm sure another person that was very shocked by that defense proffer was Howard Bloom, because he is actually the only one I know of that's done any work into the investigation of the defense team in this case. But when I think about it, there's only two conclusions that I could come to. Is the defense did that as a way to throw off the prosecution in the case for the trial. And we know the defense holds everything close to the belt until trial. But I read my comments. I had a lot of people say, oh, man, at this point, you gotta do this, do that. Really? I don't think so. Because at this point, I'm presenting the truth based on the facts in the case, what we know happened. And in doing that, though, they do require me to go back and rethink everything, observe everything that I've looked at, and look for all the possibilities in this case. And one thing did become clear when I did that, is I didn't put enough answers on that question that I presented. Is the defense team stupid? Yes, no, or is there a third answer to that question? And is it staring us right in the face? And as I look at everything surrounding this, especially when it comes to the motion to continue that I will be discussing here in just a little bit, it's not just the fact that the judge denied the motion, it's the manner in which he denied the motion, but more importantly, I think it may have something to do with who argued the motion. And that is the elephant in the room. But just to touch one more time on this alternative perpetrator proffer, in my mind, there is no way the defense would show their hand on what they plan to do at trial. 51 days away, and we'll find out for sure. But when I read in the actual ruling by the judge, and I see the statements that we didn't get to hear in that closed hearing by the defense, and then I look at all the other things that surround that particular subject, there's no other conclusion that I can come to. And this is what I mean. The defendant conceded. All right. When it says conceded, that means the defendant admits at oral argument in that closed hearing we didn't get to see that at this point, his proof of evidence of alternative perpetrators is not enough to pursue an alternate perpetrator theory at the outset of trial, but request latitude and cross-examination of the state's witnesses to try to establish additional evidence to satisfy the Meister standard. So when I look at that and I say the defendant's defense team admits in the closed hearing to the judge and the world that his offer of proof for evidence of the alternative perpetrator is not sufficient, it tells me that they went into it knowing that this motion would be denied. There's no other way I can assess that. So knowing that they know it's going to be denied, I can't think of any strategic way that the defense could have been thinking going into that alternative perpetrator proffer where they would put in what they're really planning to do could have any potential benefit to them at all. Now, they do have to submit an alternative perpetrator proffer just to follow the standards of the ABA guidelines that I went over to make sure that they've dotted every I and crossed every T in this case. But from a strategic standpoint, there's no reason to submit evidence that you know is going to be denied and give the prosecution a peek into what you're planning to do at trial. And they're very, very aware of the prosecution wanting to peek into what they're planning on doing at trial. That can be proven by their ex parte filing and what they said to the judge. They don't want the prosecution to have access to their confidential work product. And this would be a peek into their confidential work product. So in no way would I think the defense would want them to do that. And the best way that I think that they could keep them from doing that would be a bait and switch. And then when I look at the evidence against the alternative perpetrators that they've put forward, it's very clear that this would not have been a good strategy because of the DNA that was given by the alternative perpetrators to the law enforcement at the time and the exclusion of them from the evidence at the crime. We can go back to the motion in limine from the defense for inconclusive data, and it gives you an insight into who those alternative perpetrators that they named are and why it wouldn't be a good choice. All right, so this is the state's response to the defendant's motion in limine number 5, the inconclusive data, and it really gives us the insight into what I feel like would be a very, very poor strategy, and I don't believe that they would employ a poor strategy because when it talks about the inconclusive data, it specifically talks about item Q13.1, which is the DNA under Maddie's fingernails. And when you dive deep into what they did with item 13.1, Q13.1, you can see who they excluded or who was inconclusive. But based on what we've learned in this, when you look at the DNA of the people that was compared against that, one of them was Jack DeCore, and his likelihood ratio was 0.399. One of them was Cole Berenberg, likelihood ratio 0.485. So when I name two of their alternative perpetrators as Jack and Cole, that's because I already knew that they had been excluded based on their DNA in these court docs. And now the other two, obviously, were in this as well. They must be up here in this blacked out portion. But you can't go into it saying these are likely suspects based on their likelihood ratio because of what their likelihood ratio came out as. You got Jack DeCore at 0.399, Cole at 0.485, Ethan 3.33. He's the only one that even has a likelihood ratio over 1. Xana 0.201, Bethany 0.0233, and she also determined it's inconclusive whether Brian Koberger at 0.469 is a potential contributor to 13.1. So Koberger at 0.469, 0.485, 0.399, the only one in here that is suspect is Ethan's. But when we go down here and we see that the defense had the DNA 13.1 independently analyzed, it was determined that Koberger could be excluded from the profile contained in 13.1. Well, if you're excluding Kohberger at 13.1 at 469, well, then you're obviously going to exclude Cole and Jack at 0.399 and 485. So, and the only reason Kohberger was excluded is because they used an outside lab that had different parameters on the numbers for exclusion. So it tells me that putting in Cole and Jack based on that would have no more likelihood of them being a suspect as Kohberger. Now, a lot of people have pointed out some of the glaring things as it relates to the alternative perpetrator evidence and the evidence against Brian Kohberger, and I think those are very strong as well. And that may have been another reason why the defense named these particular people as alternative perpetrators, to show the absolute hypocrisy of Kohberger being a suspect in this case. But it tells me that these were not good suspects for alternative perpetrator. The defense would know that. They knew that the proffer was going to be denied. So from a strategic standpoint, I can see why they would do that. However, there could be a third reason why the defense did this versus putting forth what we know really happened in this case. And that third reason could be that elephant in the room. And we've got to start pointing that out starting right now. So when I think about the things that surround this case, believe me, I know it's difficult to try to put what really happened in this thing into a alternative perpetrator proffer that they think is going to be, you know, a valid proffer for alternative perpetrators when you think about all of the intricacies involved in this thing. And you know, I've been through hundreds of videos pointing out those intricacies, and I even have trouble if I was going to try to compile everything into one story and put that into a defense proffer. However, there's no way that you can take the victimology of the victims with their parents who was actually unalived, excuse me, and then look at all the other circumstances around the case and people that are involved with the narcotics, down to the DoorDash driver that was just uncovered and their lifestyle, and not add the narcotics angle into an alternative perpetrator proffer. Yet it happened. So something is off with that. And that's where I go back to those original questions. Is the defense team dumb? Yes or no? If the answer was no, then it's got to be some type of strategy. But then when I look at the next question that I asked in the video yesterday, what would you do? I only had two answers. There most certainly may be a third answer. And again, that's the elephant in the room. Let me pose those questions to you one more time with the third answer, and we're going to start figuring out what's really going on in this case. And this is the question that I pose to everyone. If you know the judge is going to deny your alternative perpetrator motion, would you A, just wait till trial to present your defense through witness testimony, or B, throw a bait and switch to the prosecution that you know will be denied by the judge so they aren't prepared for your real strategy at trial? A lot of people said B. Some people said the defense is stupid and it is what it is. Well, I still contend it's B. However, it could very well be C. Was this forced on the defense by the elephant in the room, which is Josh Hurwit? And that's why we've got to start asking some questions about what is going on with this part of this thing. Now, there's some things in this case that we know as a absolute certainty. Number one, this case has garnered national attention. Not only that, it's garnered attention around the world. This is the biggest case that they've seen since the O.J. Simpson case. It's been said a lot. So all eyes are on this case and on that sleepy little college town in Idaho. And I am not remiss at some of the things that I read in my comments. And I don't think it's any question whether or not there's been a lot of pressure put on the defense for certain things to happen in this case that they otherwise probably wouldn't have let happen without that pressure. And that internal pressure has led to things like the house being torn down. Nobody, and I mean nobody, sides with the defense's complicitness in that house getting torn down. And that has even been thrown back up in the defense's face by Judge Hippler here in recent months as we go through a lot of these motions. So there are certain things that we look at and we can see with our own eyes that there is internal pressure in this case on the defense to do certain things. Now, when I look at the elephant in the room, that internal pressure is now manifested itself, in my opinion, as external pressure. And I'm going to go back to something that I heard A.R. Hayes say in his live that he did with Unfiltered Lucky after A.R. Hayes traveled to the courthouse and sat in the hearing that day and heard things that we weren't able to hear before the actual cameras turned on. And it's been in my mind since I heard him make this statement. And contrary to popular belief, I actually like A.R. Hayes. He thinks I don't like him. I actually do like the guy. I'd rather not be his adversary because I do think he brings good insight into this case. And I listened to all of his videos, whether he knows it or not. This one in particular, this should tell you that I pay attention to the words that comes out of his mouth. But I believe this one was very telling, and only he could tell this one, apparently.
The new federal prosecutor was in the courtroom before the hearing started, sitting on the prosecution side, but he was sitting back where we were in the pews. He wasn't sitting up with the prosecution. And let me tell you, he looked like he was 15 years old. He had little Harry Potter glasses on and little nicely trimmed up. I mean, he looked very young to me. I was like, wow, this is a kid right here, you know. And people say he's done great work in various things, and I looked at him and go, all right, whatever, you know. But even the judge told him, like me not wanting to be here, I apologize to you that you have to be here. And I sat back when he said that, and I don't know if that's before the cameras were rolling for everybody to see when he said that or not. I sat back and said, so a judge is literally telling the prosecution he's apologetic that they have to be there? Why aren't you looking at everybody and apologizing that any of us have to be?
So for those of you that have followed me for a long time, I'm probably the only one that ever highlighted this guy long before he was ever assigned to the Kohberger case, because of all the work that I've done in the investigation in this case with the Aryan prison gangs and their drug trafficking operations and how he was integral in taking them down in Idaho. So when I heard A.R. Hayes say that, it really made me kind of cringe because I knew that there was some reason that this guy was brought into this case. And when you look at everything around this case and everything around this guy, him being brought in to actually litigate this case is the most suspicious thing that we could possibly see happen in this case. And then he's the one who argued the motion to continue denial. He's the one that presented the argument to the judge, and he's the one that obviously elicited the response from the judge in this denial of the motion to continue. And I can't help but think he may have something to do with why the defense entered that proffer and never brought up narcotics in that proffer, because we all know narcotics are everywhere around this case, and it can't be denied at this point. So let's talk about this guy for just a minute. Okay, so U.S. Attorney Josh Hurwit concludes service as top federal law enforcement official for Idaho. And this was Thursday, February 13th, 2025. And when we think about this, I mean, this guy is the top federal law enforcement official for Idaho in the whole state on the federal side. He was appointed by Biden. And when you look at his background, it is very, very extensive. One thing it's not extensive in, though, is litigating a prosecution of an individual for a quadruple unaliving. But you can see that in Boise, Josh Hurwit, 44, concluded his service today as United States Attorney for the District of Idaho, the top federal law enforcement position in the state. It is customary for political appointees to depart at the start of a new presidential administration. Hurwit thanked President Sleepy Joe Biden for nominating him, and Senators Jim Risch and Mike Crapo, Mike Crapo, for their support during the nomination and confirmation process. Risch and Crapo. It has been the honor of my professional life to serve as United States Attorney, and I am profoundly grateful to my colleagues and to all those who joined with us to fight crime and ensure justice for all Idahoans, said former U.S. Attorney Hurwit. Leading a team of dedicated and extremely talented public servants has been a privilege every single day. Pretty big, leading that monstrous team, right? The professionals in the U.S. Attorney's Office exemplify the highest standards of excellence in their commitment to justice. Alongside our local, state, tribal, and federal law enforcement partners, we have used collaborative strategies to address the most pressing threats to Idaho communities, like F trafficking and the online exploitation of children. Our efforts have made an impact, and I have no doubt that this office will continue to positively impact our communities and ensure Idaho remains a wonderful place to live. During U.S. Attorney Hurwit's tenure, the office redoubled its efforts to dismantle cartel-connected networks responsible for bringing dangerous drugs into Idaho. Working with its law enforcement partners, the office successfully prosecuted several drug trafficking conspiracies involving more than 10 defendants, including the Perez Gomez case in Jerome, the Cisneros Guzman et al. Set of cases in Canyon. As the Perez Gomez prosecution shows, the attorney's office focused on ensuring the state and local enforcement can use federal prosecution in all parts of Idaho, even more rural areas hours away from a federal courthouse. The office also is now poised to host a new special assistant U.S. attorney in its Coeur d'Alene branch office as a result of the partnership between the state of Idaho, Shoshone County, and other counties and cities in North Idaho. The office remained focused on the opioid epidemic and deadly scourge of illicit F, prosecuting 13 cases against drug dealers whose conduct led to a death due to the use of illicit F. The Basil, Walsh, and Goforth cases exemplify the office's commitment to holding F dealers accountable and deterring other dealers from selling F in Idaho. Under U.S. Attorney Hurwit's leadership, the office also addressed F through the robust training and awareness programs across Idaho. Along with federal and state partners, the office designed and conducted multiple two-day fentanyl enforcement trainings for local law enforcement. Those trainings provide up-to-date intelligence and covered investigation best practices for approximately 24 agencies, including many in rural Idaho. With the DEA and the Idaho Office of Drug Policy, the office held the first F Family Summit in Idaho, which provided support to families of 8 victims of F poisoning, and through the courageous and selfless efforts raised awareness about F. The office also supported Idaho's first F Youth Summit, which brought together middle school students from 3 school districts to design projects in their schools to raise awareness about dangerous drugs and support healthy decision making. The office also continued to grow its Project Safe Childhood program, through which the office prosecutes child exploitation crimes. Since June of 2022, 135 such cases were sentenced or charged. The Aguayo case from Pocatello, the Malone case from Boise, and the Richmond case from Post Falls are representative examples of how Project Safe Childhood removes dangerous predators from all parts of Idaho. This program is positioned to continue to excel through a broad array of partnerships. Among them, joint efforts with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force at the Idaho Office of the Attorney General and the Treasure Valley Human Trafficking Task Force. U.S. Attorney's Office also remained focused on violent crime trends, even as the violent crime rate declined in Idaho consistent with the national trends. Through the Project Safe Neighborhoods initiative, the office's prosecuted partner The office's prosecutors partnered with local and state law enforcement to target violent offenders in Idaho communities. The Bright, Logan, and Ryan cases are prime examples. In eastern Idaho, the prosecution of Morales et al. Broke up a dangerous criminal network through which drugs from the southern border were exchanged for firearms in Idaho, some of which were recovered at crime scenes in Idaho and states across the region. During U.S. Attorney Hurwit's tenure, the office also dedicated increased resources to financial fraud. U.S. Attorney Hurwit established a COVID-19 fraud task force to investigate illegal misuse of pandemic relief funds. So far, this effort has resulted in cases against 17 criminal defendants and civil settlements with 4 defendants. The amount of fraud associated with these cases is over $8.5 billion. The office's prosecutors also obtained guilty verdicts against defendants in Meridian who sold counterfeit electronic devices made in China, a defendant who defrauded his partners in a Rexburg construction project, and a defendant from Coeur d'Alene who committed financial fraud as part of his forestry management business. The office's civil enforcement attorneys obtained $5.9 million in judgments and settlements in cases involving healthcare fraud and procurement fraud. The office also emphasized civil rights and hate crimes enforcement, including by hosting United Against Hate forums with the Coeur d'Alene tribe, the Nez Perce tribe, the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, and the Kootenai tribe of Idaho, among many other partners. The office was proud to strengthen its government-to-government relationships with Idaho's sovereign Native American tribes in other ways. For example, co-hosting a regional law enforcement workshop with the Nez Perce tribe. U.S. Attorney Hurwit streamlined the office's financial collection and asset forfeiture functions into a reorganized asset recovery division. This team collected approximately $17.25 million in criminal and civil judgments, fines, restitution, and forfeiture. These funds were returned to victims and taxpayers. Between 2012 and his confirmation as U.S. Attorney in 2022, Hurwit served as an assistant U.S. Attorney in Idaho, first in the civil division and then the criminal division. He primarily prosecuted complex financial and environmental crimes, and he led the investigation into the Aryan Knights white supremacist prison gang, which resulted in charges against 10 defendants under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations RICO Act. In 2015, he received the Director's Award for Excellence by a Litigative Team for his work as part of the team that successfully prosecuted United States versus Swenson et al., the securities and wire fraud case arising from the collapse of DBSI Inc. Prior to government service, Hurwit worked at the law firms of Covington Burling LLP and Kirkland and Ellis in San Francisco, and Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison LLP in New York City. After law school, Hurwit clerked for the U.S. District Judge Naomi Rice Buchwald in the Southern District of New York. During his tenure as U.S. Attorney, Hurwit served on numerous Attorney General Advisory Council subcommittees. He was the chair of the Border and Immigration Subcommittee, the chair of Hate Crimes Working Group within the Civil Rights Subcommittee, and he served on the White Collar Crime and Cyber and Intellectual Property Subcommittees. U.S. Attorney Hurwit proudly worked to strengthen relationships between his office and tribal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, traveling to 40 of Idaho's 44 counties to meet with sheriffs, police chiefs, and county prosecuting attorneys. As provided for under the Vacancies Reform Act, the first U.S. Attorney will immediately resume office as acting U.S. Attorney until further action by the new administration. I'm excited to watch the office's continued success, said former U.S. Attorney Hurwit. Every member of the team has the highest professional and ethical standards, and together with our law enforcement partners, they will ensure that the administration of justice will continue seamlessly in the District of Idaho. The District of Idaho covers all counties and 5 tribal reservations across the state. The U.S. Attorney's Office, with staffed offices in Boise, Pocatello, and Coeur d'Alene, employs 31 attorneys and 28 support staff who are responsible for conducting all criminal and civil litigation in the district involving the United States government. U.S. Attorney Hurwit had the distinct privilege of hiring 15 of these career public servants. U.S. Attorney Hurwit will continue to reside in Boise and has not yet decided on his future professional plans. Well, it didn't take him long to decide on those future professional plans, as he rolled directly into being apparently one of the lead prosecutors in the Koberger case, even though I just read his history to you, and his expertise is taking down prison gangs, drug trafficking organizations, human trafficking organizations, financial crimes, and most of his work outside of Idaho was done in San Francisco and New York. Not exactly the poster child for being a prosecutor in a local unaliving case, is he? Let's continue. Joshua Hurwit. On June 15, 2022, Joshua D Hurwit was sworn in as the 32nd presidentially appointed United States Attorney for the District of Idaho after having been nominated by President Biden and confirmed by the United States Senate. Mr. Hurwit joined the office in 2012 as an Assistant United States Attorney. He has investigated and prosecuted financial crimes, public corruption cases, environmental crimes, cases brought under the RICO Act, and drug and firearms offenses. Never in there do you see he prosecuted an unaliving case. When he initially joined the office, he served in the civil division, handling environmental litigation and enforcement actions on behalf of the United States. In 2015, Mr. Hurwit received the Director's Award for Excellence by a litigative team for his work as part of the team that successfully prosecuted United States versus Swenson et al., the securities and wire fraud case arising from the collapse of DBSI Inc. Mr. Hurwit grew up in Eugene, Oregon, and graduated from Stanford University in 2022. Before attending law school, Mr. Hurwit worked for a fair housing organization in the Bay Area. Mr. Hurwit graduated from Harvard Law School in 2006. He then clerked for the U.S. District Judge Naomi Rice Buchwald of the Southern District of New York and worked at national law firms before joining the United States Attorney's Office in Idaho. Mr. Hurwit has taught as an adjunct professor at the University of Idaho College of Law, has volunteered his time speaking to high school students about the criminal justice system, and has served on the boards of local nonprofits. Where in there does it say anything other than he has always been a federal guy prosecuting large federal organized cases? Now we see him as the prosecutor on a unaliving case, a local small town case, and you are not seeing the elephant in the room in all of the decisions and all the notices filed in this case. Since he's come on board, you can bet the pressure has been tremendous on everyone. So when I ask for people to think deep in this case, I know a lot of the people that follow me can do just that. Some people, though, they like to take things at face value and ignore everything around the situation. In this type of case, you can't do that. A lot of people are downing Ann Taylor right now, saying that, well, they're just not up for the challenge. They're not good enough. They're just simple-minded. Well, if you think about everything around the situation, including the obvious internal pressure that has been put on Ann Taylor in this case from people like the former U.S. Attorney General for the United States in the District of Idaho, for the university, which she has allegiance to, and all of the local law enforcement, everybody that she deals with and will have to deal with for the rest of this case. When you think about the internal pressure that has to be put on her, to be being put on her in a case like this for some of the decisions that she's having to make, well, I kind of feel for her. But I think that's another reason why we have to be so vigilant in watching every single thing that goes on in this case to make sure that although we know there's internal pressure on Ann Taylor and team to make some of the decisions that they're making, well, we've got to keep our eyes open to make sure that that internal pressure hasn't pushed things too far and has them making decisions that we know are not the right decisions. At this point, I can honestly say that I believe that the defense team, is partially complying with those internal pressures, but doing so in a way to where they don't lose their advantage when this thing comes to trial. But we got to pick the fly stuff out of the black pepper on every single thing in this case and put the things that we see on the forefront, or else it will pass us by. So I'll be bringing you the breakdown of the motion to continue here shortly. And absolutely, that was written and argued by Joshua Hurwit. With what you heard A.R. Hayes say that he heard in that court before the cameras went on, and how the judge was apologizing to him for having to be there, it tells me that when he opens his mouth and speaks, whether it's in a written motion or an oral argument, the judge, for some reason, is going to take everything that he says as gospel and move forward. And that appears to be what happened in that motion to deny the continue. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms, and until next time, Pavarotti's out.